Hello, art historians. Today we're back with the next section of our study of Africa and the art of Africa. And today we're going to be studying the art of Nigeria. And we have three pieces from Nigeria that we're going to study. So let's go back and look at our map so that we know where we are. Here's Nigeria, this little chunk right here. Okay, so last time we did this little section of Western Africa. Now we're going to do this little piece right here. So we're going to go we're going to go to Nigeria. Oh, whoa. And we're going to start with this piece called the wall plaque from the Oba's palace. This is sometimes called the equestrian Oba or the equestrian plaque. Equestrian meaning horse, and that word equestrian, Equestrian. So here you see a man on a horse with some attendants, and we'll talk about that. So the people that made this were the Edo people, and they lived in what was then called Benin. It's now the country of Nigeria, but it was the country of Benin. And so plaques like this one are frequently referred to as Benin plaques. They are lost wax done in that cast brass, and they are incredibly important for many, many reasons when it comes to the study of art history, the study of Africa. These are some of the most important and also most contested objects that exist in African art. What you have to first start with is, what is an Oba? An Oba is the king. So let's do your second image, which is your contextual image. Here's the current modern day Oba. Sorry, that's my thing there to tell me to have a meeting. Sorry about that alarm. So that is that's your Oba, the king, the modern day ruler of the Edo people in what they call Benin. It is no longer called Benin, and like I said, it is now referred to as, it is now part of the country of Nigeria, but there's an area of Nigeria called Benin. All right, so this is your Oba, and I want you to pay attention. Look at his attendants, look at the things they're carrying here, look at the coral around their neck, and we're gonna go back to our piece, and here you see the Oba's attendants, and again, the coral. So this is the same lost wax technique as was used to create the seated boxer. So we're looking at the creation of these pieces, and we're looking at, these were made in the 1500s. And how did they figure out how to do this lost wax casting? Well, people often forget that, some of our earliest civilizations, Egypt, we're going to talk about Zimbabwe, these are African civilizations, and often people forget that African art is incredibly complex and incredibly well developed. So the Africans set up, particularly the people of Benin / what is now Nigeria, set up a really positive trade agreement with Portugal in the 1500s. And it was really positive. It didn't involve slaves yet when it first started. Portugal would get things like peppers and cloth and beads, things like that, from the Portuguese. And Benin would get, the Africans would get coral and brass, guns and horses from the Portuguese. And so there was this trade that started. And for quite a while, the trade was quite positive. And it allowed the people of Benin to expand the kinds of things that they could make, thus the lost wax here. And, excuse me, and it also, it allowed the people of Portugal to have things that were not indigenous to them. And for quite some time, it was a very positive economic relationship. It then sort of devolved into Portugal beginning to take people from Benin and take them as slaves. And then when the Portuguese began to have an economic downturn, and they wanted to stop their slave trade, and they were having some trouble getting ships all the way to Africa and stuff like that, and they wanted to get out of their colonization in Africa, the British came in, and the British took over. And when the British took over Benin, it was very bad. The British were wildly involved in slave trade, and they were also involved in serious imperialism / colonization / colonialism, where they basically wanted to just be in charge of these people. And so what you're looking at is sort of just before things go really, really badly for them. So what you're dealing with is the Oba, the king, and that says wall plaque from the Oba's palace. So in the Oba's palace, there were over 900 of these plaques. Okay, when you look at how high they are, they're about 20 inches high, about 16 and a half, 17 inches wide. They are high relief. They stick out. Look, 4 inches they stick out. So 20 by 16, big pieces, okay? There were over 900 of them. And they were put up on the walls of the Oba's palace as basically, they were, what's the best way to describe it? Like a visual timeline. They were the history and royal lineage of the kings of Benin, of the kings of the Edo people. And they were hung around the Oba's palace in a way that then the palace historians could walk down the length of the palace and explain or tell the story of the people of Benin, the Edo people, and each of the Obas and what each of them did and things like that. And so what you see here with this piece is this is one of the Obas that shows very clearly trade with Portugal. You see the coral beads around his neck and on his head, which are clear that they've been obtained from the Portuguese. You see the horse that he is on, the biggest example of Portuguese trade. But you also see things that are clearly African. You see African facial features, you see African clothing, and you can see sort of the combination between African and European clothes and African and European art. There are some things here that are clearly African. The depictions of the faces are clearly African art. But the background that is covered, and I'm going to go to your next slide really quickly. Sorry. The background is covered with all these really beautiful flowers and all of these beautiful dots. And they're meant to look like an illuminated manuscript. They're meant to look like some of those old books, from some of those old illuminated manuscripts, beautiful, the Lindisfarne Gospel and stuff like that. So they're decorated with what is clearly European influence. And clearly we get the influence as well from Europe in the materials. When you look here, you see the Oba is standing on someone. He's standing on his enemy. I love that little tiny enemy guy there. And these people, this is an attempt to show, some kind of perspective that those people are further behind. But these attendants here are holding these shields that are meant to protect the Oba from the sun. And these are his attendants who, make sure that his horse is okay. And so what you're looking at here is really a high relief, beautiful example of African art. So why are these such a big deal? Well, they're such a big deal because they teach us a great deal about art history. When the British came in and became in charge of Benin, the people of Benin tried to rebel, and they tried to assert their independence because the British wanted to have a much more possessive control in Benin than the Portuguese did, and they attempted to assert their independence, and they got into a fight with some British officers. and they killed a couple of British officers. So what happened was the British government set off these soldiers in what is referred to as the 1897 punitive expedition. Punitive means to punish. Okay, so they called it the punitive expedition. And what they did was they sent soldiers to Benin to destroy the Oba's palace, to kill the Oba, and to put down any rebellion. And so that's why this is not one of your contextual images, but I'm going to show it to you. This is what you see is left of the Oba's palace. It is in ruins. They've destroyed it. You can see all of the Benin plaques sitting on the ground, right? You can see all of the things that they've taken from inside the Oba's palace, important statues of kings and things like that. And so what they did was they seized the palace, they burned the cities, they killed so many people, they took all of these objects. And in some of the writings about the 1897 punitive expedition, the words subdue the natives are written in there a couple of times. So the British went in there with the intention of causing trouble, destroying things, and making it clear that they were in charge. In the process of doing this, they took the over 900 Benin plaques off the walls and boxed them up and put them in storage. And they killed most of the people who were able to identify the history. And when they boxed them up and put them in storage, they didn't do them with any kind of plan or order. And this is one of those moments where archaeology learns from the historic events, but also learns from the horrible things that people did. Because of the way that the British took these down and put them just in any order and then boxed them up and killed the people that knew, there is no one that can identify. There was no one left who could identify who these people were in these plaques, what order they belonged in, what order they were hung in. There's nothing. And it is one of those lessons where what archaeology has learned is position is key. You don't move anything from where you find it unless it's been documented 3 different ways, because where something is found is just as important as it being found. And in the matter of a couple of days, the 1897 punitive expedition erased almost 400 years of Benin history. And it's impossible to get it back. So the British took these. They have almost 400 of them. Some of the men in the expedition were allowed to keep a couple of them. The majority of them went back to England and are in the British Museum. There are some at the Louvre. There are some at the Met in New York City. And this is another interesting moment where you can talk about who should own history. The country of Nigeria is establishing a museum of the history of Benin, this small nation that existed in what is modern day Nigeria, and it is the history of Benin and the Edo people. They have asked for these Benin plaques to be returned, and none of the places that possess them are willing to give them to the museum in Benin. The British Museum won't give them any. The Louvre won't give them any. The Met Museum won't give them any. None of the big museums that have these in their possession are willing to give them to the Benin Museum. And it is very much about, it's an argument about who does art belong to? Who should art belong to? And should you be allowed to keep art that you obtained through the slaughter of people? And so the Benin plaques are a really important piece of art historical information for so many reasons. One, they're evidence of what can take place when there's a positive trade agreement between countries, right? The early positive trade between Benin and Portugal was very good. Two, that can show how a trade agreement can influence the art. You see clearly African inspirations, but also clearly inspirations from the European art. Three, it shows you how important the location of art is. How if a piece of art or artifact is removed from its location, it can lose its meaning. Four, it shows that many of our museums are formed through collections that were obtained in nefarious, terrible, awful ways. Five, it brings up the question of who owns art and who should own art. It is really, the last one is six. We underestimate often as Western civilization. I hate that sentence. We often underestimate the ability, the artistic ability of African people. When the British first came to Benin, they didn't believe that these pieces had been made by Africans. They believed that these pieces had been made by Portuguese and brought to Africa. And members of the Oba's palace showed them like the construction of these plaques. And the British still struggled with the idea that something that looked like this could have been made by Africans. And it is inherent, there is an inherent belief that African peoples were not as cultured or civilized as Western or Europeans. And this is also an example of why we need to stop thinking that way. This is beautiful art. And when you think that this was happening in the 1500s, and you think about some of the other things that were happening in the 1500s in Europe, it's equivalent. Like this is beautiful work that was being done at the same time that Michelangelo was sculpting. And this is stunning, right? And so it's also, Benin plaques are also an excellent way to make us question if we have an inherent bias against African art. So it's they're beautiful and they're incredibly important. Yeah, so there's that. I should probably also mention at this point that my capstone paper for my art history degree is about who owns art and contested art and art that should be repatriated to its country of origin. And the Benin's plaques are a huge section of my my capstone paper. So if you ever want to talk about the Benin plaques, I have plenty to say. All right, moving on. Here we go. This is also from Nigeria, but those are from the Igbo people. That G is silent. So it's E, like a hard E. G is silent. So the I is pronounced like an E, B-O, Igbo people of Nigeria. So again, we're returning to a piece that is made of wood. So this is from the 19th or 20th century. There are many, many, many of these, and they vary in height from about 11 inches to 20 inches. And an Ikenga is a shrine figure. Okay, that's its job. It acts as a it acts as a statue for a shrine. Okay, it is carved in the round. It's always carved in the round to be seen from all sides. The word Ikenga means strong right arm. Okay, so that's what that means. And so what you're looking at is it is a piece of wood that is made for a warrior, and its job is to act as like a status symbol. Its job, it's like your diploma. It's like a way of saying, I have achieved this. It's like getting a certificate for finishing, the training. Okay, it's a way of saying this person made this amazing thing. And you can have more than one. Like if I were to have an Ikenga, I could have one that was my high school graduation to show that I did this. If my job in my peoples and my society is to be like the librarian or the smart one, right? I could have an Ikenga for my high school graduation and my college graduation number 1 and my college graduation number 2 and my college graduation number 3. So I could have like 4 Ikengas, right? I could even have one for like my English certification to teach English and my certification to teach art. I could have a couple more, right? So you can, the idea is that it represents important things that you have accomplished. These were particularly, though, made for warriors. So they would be given, an Ikenga would be given probably when you reach that age of maturation, your first kill, your, whatever. So you would have these made. You'll notice that they look like they have horns, and that is they are representative of a ram. And that is because a famous African saying is, and it's all throughout Africa. So I'm not just like pretending like Africa is a single country. It's popular throughout Africa that rams fight with their heads first. And that can be taken 2 ways, right? Rams fight with their horns, right? So there's the horns, but fighting with your head first means using your knowledge, using your brain, using your intelligence. Okay. So that's sort of this, that it is indicative of their strength. It does have, it is always pictured with, at some point, a hand holding a sword. So you see here's a hand holding a sword. There's always a hand holding a sword. So the sword is symbolic of being able to cut through anything, to slice through any difficulty. It's a way of saying that he can be successful. So this is really cool because it's physical strength and intellectual strength, and it's kept in the house of the person that it represents, and it is just there to remind the person, the family, visitors of his knowledge and his physical strength. It is not a realistic portrait. Clearly, this doesn't look like anyone. It is a stylized portrait, and you can see his head here. And it is meant to, it's meant to be symbolic of power. You can see the markings here on it. Those are markings of ritual scarification, body decoration, body scarification, ritual scarification, it changes depending on which peoples we're talking about. Ritual scarification in the north of Africa looks different than it looks in the south of Africa. But ritual scarification is popular in Africa and in Oceania. And so this would have been, it would have been made for a warrior. It would have been blessed by the shaman, and the shaman is that religious leader of a group of people, of a society. It would have been blessed by the shaman, and then it would have been consecrated by the family of this person, bringing offerings to it, and then it would have been placed in a place of importance in the house. Now, what's interesting about this, and what's really cool about this, is it doesn't do anything, right? It is, other than remind the person and the family of the achievements of the person. Kind of like my college diplomas don't do anything, right? They're not magical. They don't get me like magically into the front of the line. They don't, right? Like they're just symbolic of what I've accomplished. Same here with the Ikenga. But what's really cool about them is when the warrior dies, there's no longer a need for it. And it is destroyed. And so many times we come into the possession of Ikengas in a way that is not questionable because they would have been destroyed anyway. And so we're lucky to have them because they would have just been destroyed. And so many times families are willing to just give them to archaeologists because they're not magical. They don't have religious, magical, spiritual powers. And so sometimes when you come into possession of things, sometimes it's okay to have them. But much of African art is is unfortunately much of African art is stolen, and that has a lot to do with colonization and colonialism and imperialism and stuff like that. So let's move to the next one. We're still in Nigeria, but we're with the Yoruba people. And so what's interesting about this piece is, again, still in Nigeria, but with the Yoruba people versus the Igbo people versus the Edo people. So this is why we talk about peoples, okay? But this is one of those times where it's very unusual in that we have an artist. And the artist here is Oluwe of Ise, Oluwe of Ise. That's how you say that. And he is super, super, super well known. He's like one of the most famous artists of Western Africa. He is the most famous and well-known artist of the Yoruba people, to the point that he put his name on stuff, right? And that they documented what was done here. And so it's very unusual that his name is known. So that's one of the reasons why his work is so respected, is he was so well known that we documented his name. It's interesting that we look at what we have here, and we have to sort of examine the title, right? We have to look at the title too. So I'm working my way down through Oluwe of Ise, Yoruba people. This was completed between 1910 and 1914, and we know this because of where it came from. We'll talk about that in a second. Wood and pigment, it's wood, it's painted 71 inches high, that's tall, right? 6 feet, okay? And 12 inches wide, like from her shoulder to her other shoulder, and then 16 inches deep from her back to the front of the front, okay? And you're looking at your theme here, a multi-figure work, royalty and court. All right, so that's easy. But then we look at what we actually have. Veranda post. So you have to take this apart because not everybody knows what a veranda is. A veranda is like a front porch, right? You sit on your veranda. So this is the post that would have been in sort of the four corners of the veranda of the royal palace, the front porch of the royal palace. And these posts held up the front porch of the royal palace. And they were highly decorative and highly, highly, highly stylized and beautifully, beautifully carved. And this is the one of the enthroned king. So here's the king sitting on his throne with his senior wife. This is his most important wife. And this is his junior wife down here. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. And his senior wife is Opo Agoga. Okay. Now, what else do we have? We are lucky in that we live near a place where we can go and see one of these. What? I know, it's exciting. So this is another one by Oluwe of Ise, and this is at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Okay, so that's what this building is. It's in DC. And you see 1, 2, 3 little things here. The shape of this building is based on the shape of the veranda post that was created by Oluwe of Ise. And so when they created this museum of African American history and culture, there was a direct reference in both the exterior of the building, brass and bronze, like their cast works, and the shape of the building, like this piece of Yoruba art. So you can go see the veranda post down at this museum in DC. Okay, so let's come back to this. So Oluwe of Ise lived from 1878 to 1938. And he created 4 of these veranda posts for the royal palace of Ikiri. Okay, that's the name of the king, the name of the palace. He was a master carver, and he was in the court of the king here, and that's the king's name, Ikiri. And he was a carver in his court, and it's kind of like when you think about how the Medicis hired Michelangelo for everything, or Raphael for like a million things, right? Like how the Sforzas commissioned Da Vinci for like a million things. That's kind of like this. Oluwe of Ise is sort of like the artist of the most famous artist or favorite artist of the king. And so when they built this new palace and put the porch on it, um, the king commissioned Oluwe to create the 4 veranda posts. And so on this one, what you see here is a very large scale, larger than life, because it's 7 feet tall, or 6 feet tall, and she's a little larger than life, and she's green, and so so she is highly stylized. And so what you see here is the queen, who is standing behind the king who's on his throne, but it is to show that they are separate but connected. Her hands are part of this throne. And so it shows that um, they are they rule together. And so it's very much like this idea of the king and queen being equal partners. And hopefully that will remind those of you who did stand Vitali of Justinian and Theodora, how they were co-rulers. So here was Ikiri and his wife, Ogoga. So what you see is her and him, and then down here is one of the junior wife, and then this is the fan playing god Isu, E-S-U. And so what do we see here? We see hierarchy of scale. In this piece, she is the most important. And why is that? Well, because the concept that, like, it's a famous Western saying, behind every great man is a woman. Right? Women are important in African society, incredibly important. The queen is considered a very, very important role in that she supports the king. She helps the king. Actually, during the ceremony where the king is crowned king, she is actually the one that puts the crown on his head here in the Yoruba people. So she's being honored. But what's awesome is it's exaggerated proportions. Obviously, her breasts are not pointed like that. And obviously, she's not 100 feet taller than him like that. He looks small here. But look at, not only do we have these exaggerated proportions, but we have these beautiful rhythm and repetition. The shape of her breasts is echoed here in like all of these angular lines, her chin, her breasts, his chin. Okay, the tail of the bird. We see all of these really strong diagonal lines. Okay. We also see lots of what's really cool, which is called this negative space. The idea of this, here's the bird and its beak, which attaches to the crown of the king, and this open space that's created here, because this beak is connected. And the bird is connected, and there's this open space. And then there's the open space behind her arm here, and the open space between him and her. And that's called negative space. It's stuff where there isn't anything. And this use of negative space really shows the mastery of craftsmanship in Oluwe of Ise to be able to carve this piece of wood. It is a very bold design. She is meant to stand out in color. Her hair is meant to look like braids, but is also the design that attaches her head to the rest of the post that would hold up the rest of the ceiling. We see that they're constantly touching. So her hands are connected to the throne. The beads around her waist are connected to the throne. And so it really shows her importance in their relationship and to the people as a whole, to the society as a whole. So that's why she is on this post. She's important. Not more important than the king, but this is her moment to shine on this veranda post. And so it's just all these beautiful lines, like down from her jaw, down the bird, down the edge of his face. It's really, really an implied line. It's not really drawn there, but you can see it also down her breast and across his jaw. It's just, it's really quite lovely. And the exaggerated proportions don't make us feel uncomfortable. And so it's really kind of cool that they seem to be comfortable. And it's a really beautiful piece. So that's the end of our study of Nigeria. And I will meet you next time and we will talk about Cameroon. And so I leave you today with the Obus Palace, and I will see you next time for our discussion of the art of Cameroon. Bye, guys.